What's up? I'm Coach Dan Blewett. In today's video, we're going to cover the baseball position. So we'll cover the baseball position numbers. We'll cover some of the quirks of the system, how you can score, a game if you're doing the scorecard or if you're coaching a youth team. And we'll cover some of the skills and attributes of different players by position, because obviously a first baseman looks very different than a second baseman and has different skills than an outfielder or even a catcher. So in today's video, we'll cover all about the baseball positions. All right, so let's jump right into it. Here you see a diagram where I've got a number for each of the positions. Obviously, 1 is pitcher, 2 is catcher, 3 is first base, 4 is second base, 6 is shortstop, 5 is third base, 7 left field, 8 center field, and 9 right field. So obviously the quirk in the system here is that the shortstop is 6 and the third baseman is 5. They're out of order, right? So everyone asks, why is it like that? Well, back in the day, the shortstop was actually the 4th outfielder. And then when they moved him or her into the infield, they just kept the number the same. So that's why it's out of order. It doesn't really affect anything. It's not really that the shortstop takes charge, even though that is the shortstop's role of the infield. They sort of have priority over all their infielders on like pop-ups and stuff like that. And the shortstop is one of the most demanding, if not the most demanding position on the field. But that isn't really why it's scored number 6. But again, the shortstop is 6 because it was just a quirk in the system where he used to be the 4th outfielder. So when you're looking at how the scoring works, so if you want us to do the scorecard in the stands while you're watching a game, or if you're a coach, then what you need to do is you understand that a fly ball that's caught by a player where they're making the put out, so a fly ball to the center field would be a F8. A fly ball to right field would be F9. A fly ball to the catcher catch would be F2. Now, you probably have heard like a 6-4-3 double play. That's when the shortstop gets a ground ball, throws to the second baseman who's covering second, who then throws it on to first to get the double play, to complete those 2 force outs. So the shortstop, number 6, throwing it to number 4, throwing it to number 3, makes that a 6-4-3 double play. Now, if they didn't get the out at second, say the runner beat it, and it was still the shortstop threw to the second baseman who threw to the first baseman, it would just be a 6-4-3 regular put out, one out. So you could throw it all around the diamond. The first baseman could throw to the catcher, to the third base, to the shortstop, they could throw it around the horn. It would be a 1-2-5-6-4-3 put out at first base. Or they would all get an assist, and that'd be that. So that's how that works. Basically, whoever touches the ball is part of the play. And whoever is the last in the line of that chain, so 4-3 would be a ground ball to second, throws to first, that'd be a 4-3. And we know that the first baseman, made the final put out. So let's now talk about not only just the position numbers, but let's talk about the different skills and attributes of different players. So in baseball, speed and quickness, fielding ability, range, arm strength, and hitting power, those are some of the biggest considerations about where you're going to play on the field. So then basically what happens is players start to get put in bins, not literally, but basically body types will break out based on, where they're playing on the field. Bin 1 is kind of like athletic, scrappy, fast, quick players. They don't really, the size isn't quite as important as long as they're super athletes and very, very fast and quick and have good fielding range. Bin 2 is they still have a lot of those attributes, but they start to get a little bit bigger and a little bit more powerful. And then bin 3 is the biggest, strongest players where their speed's not really important, and we'll talk about that. So bin 1, fast and scrappy players, these are typically the positions up the middle. So they're great fielders, they're fast, they're good base runners. They typically hit for contact, maybe they'll hit some doubles, occasional home runs. Power is always accepted, but it's not really a demand of the position. So positions that we're talking about here up the middle are center field. You don't need a lot of home runs out of your center fielder. You really just need your center fielder to catch everything. Shortstop. If you have a premium defensive shortstop, like this is Andrelton Simmons, who's incredible, he's going to make up so much more value for your team just by being an amazing shortstop and gobbling up every ground ball and flare into the outfield that, if he hits a little bit less than, say, your third baseman, that's no big deal because he gives you so much on the defensive side. And then second base is kind of the same thing. Typically, the smallest player on the field plays second, and they're a premium defensive player, and they're going to get on base. They're going to get a lot of walks. They're going to basically, because of their smaller stature, typically hit more singles and doubles at most, but they'll hit some home runs too. Jose Altuve is an outlier. because he hit, I think, like 30 home runs in 2019 or 20. And that's not typical for second base. But again, they'll always take it if a player has that skill. So bin 2 is corner outfielders and third baseman. And these are good fielders. They have a good arm. They have some power, but they're not quite as fast because they tend to be a little bit bigger. And when you have more muscle mass on you and you're just a bigger person, you're not going to be quite as fast as like the center fielder. You're not going to have quite as much range as the shortstop. So someone like Nolan Arenado, who's an amazing fielder, but he's a physically bigger body than a second baseman or typical shortstop. He's got a lot of pop and he's going to hit for more home runs and he can carry more muscle mass because he plays third base, which doesn't require quite as much range as playing shortstop or even second base. So that's kind of accepted. Same thing with the corner outfield positions, left field and right field. You don't have to have quite as much range because you have the foul line there, right? So those are typically bigger bodied outfielders than the center fielder who has the absolute most ground to cover. And then lastly, in bin 3, you're going to have big power at first base. And then behind the plate, it's not as important that they have a lot of speed because they're not covering much ground. They just have to be excellent, receivers, throwers, blockers, and game callers. So you'll typically have the biggest player on the field, and this is like without exception at the highest levels, plays first because they don't have to make long throws typically. They don't have to have a ton of range because they're playing close to the line. So that's why the first baseman is typically this really big-bodied person. If you put your first baseman size player in center field, it would be a big problem. They wouldn't be able to get to as many fly balls into the gaps, right? So this is the way baseball has kind of shaped the body types and skills of different positions. So let's talk about pitchers real quick. So obviously pitcher they're number 1 on the position chart. So if you go back to the baseball position numbers, pitchers are number 1. And they kind of go into 3 bins: starters, short relievers, long relievers. I'll link in the description below to a video I talk more in depth about the traits of starters, relievers, and long relievers. But we'll cover those quickly here. So starting pitchers, they have good command because if you're going to pitch 6 or 7 innings or hopefully more, you have to throw strikes and keep your pitch count down. And they have good stuff. So stuff is how good is your breaking ball? How good is your changeup? How hard do you throw? So to be a starting pitcher, you have to be able to get both handed hitters out. So if you're a lefty pitcher, you have to be able to get lefties and righties out. So that seems like common sense, but it's really not. A lot of times relievers can only get one-sided hitter out predominantly. And so that's why you see lefty specialists in the major leagues where the lefty's very ineffective against right-handed hitters. So this particular lefty will only come in to pitch against like a lefty or two in tough situations. But starting pitchers have to get out both-sided hitters the entire game multiple times that they'll face them through the lineup. So that's important. And they need one out pitch at least, which is a dominant pitch that can give them a strikeout pretty reliably when they need it. So 0-2, 1-2 in the count. Does a pitcher have a nasty slider that he can get a strikeout and help bail himself out of jams? That's important. If you see Chris Sale here on the screen, he's got a dirty slider. I mean, he's got amazing stuff in general. So he can punch guys out when he needs to because when you have the bases loaded, no one out, sometimes the only way to bail yourself out of those situations is by getting a strikeout. Short relievers, they're kind of bin 2. These are more of like the sprinters if this was like a track team, right? The starting pitchers are more like the distance runners, but even then, not as much distance runners, as more as like maybe like a 400 meter. But the short relievers are the sprinters, the 100-meter guys, and you see Aroldis Chapman here, throws super hard, has a nasty slider. So he's got that dominant out pitch where if you get to 2 strikes, the guy's going to strike you out a lot of the time. And they might have less command, but that's okay because if they walk a guy or 2 more than the starter, they're going to make up for it by striking out so many more hitters. So that's typically the attributes of a short reliever, and they have this bulldog mentality. And lastly, the long reliever, this is the role that you don't want as much. It's still an important role, but long relievers, they're not really good enough to be starters, and they're not really good enough. They don't have good enough stuff to be short relievers like the 7th, 8th, 9th inning guy. And so they tend to, they don't have a clear out pitch where they can get a lot of strikeouts. They're just not as good typically. So they'll typically do what we call mop-up role, which is if the starter goes 2 innings and has a rough day, you need a long reliever to come in and pitch 4 or 5 innings to get us through the rest of the game. That's what the long reliever tends to do. So every long reliever is still important to the team. Like you have to eat up those innings and save other arms in the bullpen, especially at the higher levels. But obviously, long relievers want to pitch well and then move into better roles to get the innings that are more pressure packed and more important to the outcome of the game. No one likes pitching, the 5th through this 8th inning when your team's getting blown out 13-1. But that unfortunately is what long relievers have to do a lot of the time. So those are kind of the 3 bins as far as pitchers go. So just to review, here are the 9 baseball position numbers again 1 through 9. Again, this is important just for scoring for the most part. And if you're a youth coach starting out, or if you're a young player and you just want to know, hey, when coach says, writes me in at 5 in the lineup, where does that mean I go? All right, so hopefully this video is helpful. If you have any questions or concerns, leave them in the comments section below. And if you have other questions, you want to learn more about baseball, definitely subscribe to my channel, check out my books, courses, and other links in the description, and I'll see you here in the next video.